Well, I want to thank you. Well, this is a nice little turnout for a mid-afternoon. So let's make sure. I am Dr. Christopher Housenick here. I'm one of the political scientists here at Arkansas Tech University, and I'm doing this little presentation. Now, in full disclosure, part of why I'm doing it is I am a nerd's nerd. I can see some of my nerdy friends have decided to grace me with their presence. But part of it is this summer coming up, we are going to have a special topics class where we look at many of the Marvel movies and the real-world politics you see within it. So think of today as the teaser trailer. What you will get is a longer, in-depth examination of some very interesting and powerful topics in U.S. politics, world politics, that we will do. Now, one of the things I always get asked is, Dr. Housenick, can I really study pop culture and be an academic? Well, the answer is not just yes, but hell yes. There is a massive amount of literature that is out there. For instance, we think of Superman. He's fighting Zod. He's fighting other Kryptonians. Dr. James Moses, though, was a historian here at Tech for many years. His research area was how Superman evolved over time. Superman, we think of Superman, yeah, you're fighting aliens. Superman fighting drugs, street-level crimes, Superman fighting poverty. These were things that were done in the 60s, 70s. A popular one, zombies. You do this long enough, looking at The Walking Dead, the theories of international politics and zombies came out. This is, The Last of Us has just launched. I suspect there's going to be another wave of whatever The Last of Us. There's going to be more academic writing on it. And I think somewhere in every academic discipline at Tech, you will find someone somewhere doing real academic research. Vampires, for instance, I found in economics. They figured out that basically when you hit about 2% population, there's too many vampires, the ecosystem will collapse and die. But here's the thing, you're looking at vampires for things like global warming, climate change. Because remember, a vampire, in some cases, it's an 800-year-old rational individual. Again, you get to some others, some that I just came up with. My psychology friends, the psychology of Batman. I don't care which Batman. You got to be a little weird to dress up as a bat and go beat up criminals. Snowball's back there. The criminal justice. Ant-Man he is an ex-con, and people will remind him that he is an ex-con. But academics love to look at this stuff, and there is one I know. There's a huge series of books on philosophy. One of the ones I first remember from pop culture was The Sopranos and philosophy, because that was written because Tony Soprano loved philosophy, but he also misinterpreted it really, really badly. So there's a whole series of books on this. Now, so why are these ties? Yeah. Kevin Bacon, when he was probably most of your age, the college students' ages. Well, one, visibility and interest. Every professor here, every administrator here, everybody over the age of 28 or so has probably had a moment when you use an example and the student looks at you like, what? Yep. These are big, visible things. You can think of what do you see when you were at Avengers, Civil War, Avengers, Endgame, etc. These are big in popular culture. A second reason, a big reason, is you are able to approach really difficult topics and issues through allegories. These movies are allegorical. You're able to look at difficult things without, like, if I came out and said, ideas about racism, sexism, homophobia, you would often be labeled, you could be attacked for it, unfortunately, too often in our society. If you look at these things through allegories, though, where they're showing you hints where it's not in your face as much, there's a little bit more ease and safety in it. Last but not least, and where this GIF comes from, once in a while in academia, you get into real-world safety concerns. I don't think, did anybody from emergency management make it over here? Okay, we kind of won. Congratulations, I will pick on you though. About 15 years ago, emergency management realized something. With the advent of the internet, with the advent of social media, you need to train for disasters. But the information about that training would spread like wildfire. And practicing for something that was real world could send people into a tizzy. For instance, around Washington, D.C., about 15 years ago, the U.S. Marines were testing a biological outbreak. They were doing it in the metro, Saturday night to Sunday morning, and they're dealing with an anthrax scare. What happened? People freaked out. Why? Why are you preparing for anthrax? Is real anthrax coming? And not the band, the disease. So what do you think the military picks up? Let's go pick up a fictional disease. What'd they use? Zombies. Because you know, again, if you want to go deep nerd, how many of you have ever seen Jaws? The mayor of Jaws explains this perfectly. You're swimming at the beach. They yell, lifeguard yells, barracuda. What? Huh? But I yell shark. And you are going to have the 4th of July panic and all of that sort of thing going on. Now, with that introduction, I need to put in a spoiler alert. Again, I assume you've seen these movies. And I do feel necessary, there is one topic in particular I feel strongly enough about that it should have a trigger warning. Because you're getting in, there is some darkness to this that I think you should be aware of if you need to excuse yourself. But one topic in particular, I think it's good to say, hey, there is going to be very strong material that is hinted at and implied in these movies. All right, so with that, I really want, part of what I've had to do, there is so much Marvel content. I had to put limitations on myself. You know, I could probably devise enough courses to do a Marvel Studies major, but I made a choice. We're focusing for this course on the major feature films. Because some of these are actually incredibly brilliant. How many of you have seen Falcon and Winter Soldier? Good. No spoilers. But you know, Sam is struggling with a lot of stuff in his era. He is struggling with race. You know, is America ready for a black Captain America? And surprise, surprise, history buried the first Captain America. That is him up in the upper right-hand corner, Isaiah Bradley. You know, a major theme of all these early Marvel films was the super soldier serum. We all point to Captain America, it worked, and he got, you know, so pretty and so beautiful so fast. I wish it was that easy. But the reality is the experiments have gone on year after year if you look at a lot of these films. You know, again, you get into Abomination, you know, Tim Roth's character that came back from nowhere, etc. They're still experimenting, but guess what? In the late 1940s, they succeeded in building, genetically altering a Captain America. Questions of memory, trying to replace individuals' perception. You could do one hell of a case study on John Walker, U.S. agent, how he is perceived, how the American government perceives him, how he perceives himself, etc. But again, I think that one's about 7 or 8 hours. If I had a whole 15 weeks, it could certainly be in there. Another good example, Loki. There is a process it's tricky, it's weird, bureaucratic authoritarianism. It's not where when we think authoritarianism, we think like the empire, the military runs things. Bureaucratic authoritarianism, you have oppression through literally the DMV. And in this case, it's oppression through the TVA. The TVA is going to show up and suddenly unilaterally decide you do not get to exist anymore, and they are going to disintegrate you or send you to their strange demiplane. Really interesting, really great. Again, because it's a long-form series, we got to pass on it. All right. So let's get to actually our first topic, Black Panther. I have a kind of a setup here. The way I do most of this is we're going to introduce the movie first just to refresh people's memories, and then we'll talk about the real world implications. So again, what is the movie really about? It's a very Shakespearean struggle. And it's about rulership in the fictional high-tech African kingdom of Wakanda. You know, it starts with King T'Chaka. He's visiting Los Angeles in the late 80s, early 90s. His brother's N'Jobu, who is not following Wakandan instructions and orders. There's a fight. N'Jobu is killed. But N'Jobu has a son, Eric Stevens, who will become Killmonger by the later parts of it. Skip forward a generation. T'Challa becomes after Captain America Civil War? Yep, there's the bombing. T'Chaka is killed at the UN. T'Challa ascends to the throne, but he's got to fight M'Baku first. But then Killmonger comes to claim. Fighting ensues, and you wind up with T'Challa becoming the Black Panther and the leader of Wakanda. Now, the real-world politics to start with, Black Panther is what is called a counterfactual exercise. We do this all the time. It's a what-if exercise. You know, what if something never happened? You know, what if I did not oversleep today? Those sort of things. We do this all the time. You know, what if Hitler was, arrested and never came to power in the 1920s? We do this in history, political science all the time. The Kingdom of Wakanda is a true counterfactual exercise about what would Africa look like if colonialism never happened, never took place. The colonial system ran, give or take a couple of decades between friends, about 500 years. The European powers, the British, French, Portuguese, Spanish, set up colonies around the world. Carved up Africa. And what Wakanda was effectively a thought experiment. What would Africa look like if it had never been touched by the Europeans? Enslaved, oppressed, had Western European ideas dropped upon it. So this counterfactual exercise, though, it fits into some genres of literature. They call it Afrofuturism and African futurism. So the ideas of it's basically science fiction for what would Africa look like if this multi-century era could have been skipped or ignored. To that, another element of Black Panther is resource conflict. Why was Africa colonized and plundered? Material wealth. Gold, diamonds. Nowadays, you still have similar debates, but now it's about oil. You still have diamonds, rare earth mineral debates, etc. But Wakanda's technology and power comes from a fictional precious material, the vibranium. And you see here, that's they show it in one of the movies. There's the vibranium mines underneath Wakanda. It gives them power, gives them strength. And what do you see in these movies, both in Black Panther, Black Panther 2? Guess what? More people want that wealth. I think it was in Black Panther 2, the French send a military team into Wakanda to steal it at gunpoint. Well, they did the same thing in much of Africa in the 1400s, the 1500s, the 1600s, and 17 and 1800s as well. You're getting an allegory. The kind of behavior you saw in Black Panther 2, you're seeing there. The arms dealer in the first Black Panther as a Claw. Yep, there we go. What's he do? He does the same thing. He doesn't do it with the power of a country, but he does it as a black marketeer. Third, Black Panther goes way deep into the politics of otherness. I see my anthropology and sociology friends are out there in the back. We categorize people, us versus them. And I think the more I was preparing this, you could have a fascinating course case study on Killmonger. Because the theme of the movie is, where does he fit? Because he is one of 8 billion people who has no identification. He is very much isolated from everything. And that's him trying to figure that out. Again, here's some of the pictures where you see his transformation. Because Killmonger is not Wakandan. He is not American. He is literally Wakandan American. But he's also a military veteran. If you catch the story, he was 18 years old. I think he joins the Navy, winds up in the Navy SEALs, and winds up going to Iraq, Afghanistan, and hence all the scars from the missions and the assassinations he put. So he is a military combat veteran who's Wakandan American. We see that military combat veterans do wind up isolated from the general population. People don't understand what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan. He really is incredibly isolated from what we think of in society, and the movie is him trying to figure it out. How does he integrate? Does he integrate? Etc. This idea, though, is a global question. Every society will have in-groups and out-groups. There's plenty of other groups. When you think of refugees, for instance, you think of a refugee, they run from a war, the war ends and they go home. Syria, for instance. The issue is we find there's millions of people who have had to leave their homes and are gone for generation after generation. The Palestinians. You're now having third and fourth generation people born in refugee camps. Where do they fit? They may be born in a Lebanese camp, a Jordanian camp, but they have ties back to what would today be Israel, their heritage, their homeland. They have the same kinds of questions. Another one is diaspora communities. When people flee, when they move, they wind up at other places. They're still tied to that, and they have to figure it out. A good example for that, like in Arkansas, we have lots of populations who started elsewhere. Northwest Arkansas, you got the Marshallese. You leave the Marshall Islands after nuclear testing in the 50s and 60s. You settled. You've been around for 2 generations, 3 generations. The Hmong people, M-O-N-G, they're a minority throughout Southeast Asia. They've been oppressed. They've been killed. They fled, I think, in the late 70s. Fled here, but throughout the River Valley, you will find plenty of other of these communities. The Hispanic community throughout Arkansas. You're going to have people from the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, etc. Where do they fit in? And I think Black Panther brings this question up. You've got this one individual, but there are literally millions of Americans and probably thousands of Arkansans who have to deal with this exact same question. And this movie gives us this ability. Focusing a little bit on the sequel. Wakanda Forever looks at colonialism again, but I think one of the impacts of Wakanda Forever is it looks at different regions, and it finally kind of pulls the veil off a little bit. Namor effectively was a representation of Spanish colonialism. Again, so we're focusing on Africa for Black Panther, but Namor would be Incan out of the Yucatan Peninsula. There are scenes, not much, but where he shows Spanish colonialism. The Spanish have shown up, and the key is in that movie they actually show what's going on. His tribe has been infected. If I remember right, it looked like smallpox. But one of the things in the history is just the presence of diseases wiped out about 95% of the indigenous population. It ran rampant. I will apologize. I will now butcher the Spanish, but the conquistadores, yes, they came in with guns and cannons and things of that nature and conquered, but disease did incredibly more damage. And the key thing is, though, you're actually seeing the active colonization by, in that case, it would have been the Spanish. So you get another viewpoint, another vantage point for this. The second thing to bring up, a debate you see a lot in world politics is leadership of what we think of as the others. I will say Angela Bassett better win Best Supporting Actress or I Riot, because she was brilliant. But one of the debates about the whole movie is it's Namor versus her. Throughout, there has always been, world politics loves to categorize things. You know, again, European powers were the ones effectively perpetrating colonialism. During the Cold War, it was the U.S. and our buddies and the Soviet Union and their buddies. Well, there were a lot of countries who said, thanks but no thanks, we want to do our own thing. But the question is, any group needs leadership. During the Cold War, they were broadly called the non-aligned movement. About 77 countries at its beginning, and it grows to over 100. But throughout the last 70 years, there's always been somebody trying to say, I am the leader of this movement. I am the one who should be guiding the way forward for those who've been injured, oppressed, etc. One of the first ones in the Middle East, a guy by the name of Nasser out of Egypt. He's the one to first express pan-Arabism, things of that nature. Fidel Castro was big into this idea. Hugo Chavez is where the torch passes for a little bit until he passes away. Saddam Hussein of Iraq gets into this idea. It's part of his warmongering, first towards Iran and then towards Kuwait, and he had lines on Saudi Arabia. But you've got these struggles, different civilizations, different regions saying we should be the rightful leaders of these other groups, the non-Western sides of things. So, with that, time for something a little different. And now we're into Captain Marvel. This is our gender and gendered roles. And this is where I think I felt compelled to say this gets really dark really, really fast. Because in the movie, Carol Danvers is an Air Force pilot in the mid-90s. She was one of the very first female U.S. Air Force fighter pilots. She was an F-15 pilot. And, she has a collision with a UFO, winds up with superpowers, etc. That time, that era, was a low point for the way women were treated in the military service. The political rally, I really wrestled to try and find the right words, but when it comes to gender, the mid-90s were a dark time. Because the male-dominated Cold War system was going away. The issue is whenever you change a system, there is going to be resistance, ugly resistance. She is breaking through the male-exclusive domain into those areas. And what during that era, biased, gender-based hazing was standard practice, and they show this a little bit in the movie. Her instructors are yelling at her, screaming at her, and if you notice, a lot of times it is just her. There are the instructors, there are her male classmates are standing around watching this take place. At its worst, sexual assault in the military service during this era was rampant and often unreported. The example for this was the 1991 tailhook scandal. Tailhook is a naval aviation convention and been going on for about 30 years. I think you'll have to be of a certain age to remember when this story broke. They get together, they do what sailors do, they drink heavily and act like little children, is exactly how it was portrayed. It was an incredibly dark time. There was a hallway in the tailhook convention they called the gauntlet. If a woman wound up on one end of the gauntlet, they would be grabbed, dragged through, literally maybe about 200 sailors. They would wind up naked at the other end, groped, etc. This scandal breaks. There were 93 sexual assaults in 12 hours. One night of this. At the time, the Navy Secretary is a guy by the name of Jim Webb. His exact official response was that boys will be boys, was the official Secretary of Navy's response to all of this. I think you all could probably guess what the issue will eventually become. 93 assaults, hundreds of perpetrators. How many were even formally charged, would you want to gather a guess? Almost 3. And they never faced a courtroom. They literally went off scot-free. Some of them got, for lack of a better word, some of them got their careers plateaued. Jim Webb will actually run for the nomination for the President of the United States. I think he ran also in 2008, if my memory's not too shabby. His questions, when you are a Democrat running for the president, the Democratic Party was pretty clearly, leaning, caters to the women's vote. Hey, what'd you say in 1991? Yeah, is never a great response if you run for political office. Now, one of the things you run into, people will say, oh, well, that was then. That was 30 years ago. And I say, nonsense. This popular picture was bouncing around the last 2 weeks. We just had the Super Bowl. It was a major talking point. Super Bowl history. You had the first all-female aviation team to fly over. Congratulations. Awesomeness. Literally 5 days ago. What were social media like? Yeah, lots of online harassment, plenty of woke culture references, etc. So it may be different, but there are still way too many of these things to go around. But you see some of this and it's hinted at in the Captain Marvel movie. Okay, so that effectively is our first half of the class, and we're going to really change topics a bit here. The second half is a lot about military technology. We all love our technology. I see all your cell phones pulled out. You can't live without them. We've all got our own Jarvis with us, don't we? Well, some of you got Jarvis, some of you got Ultron, some of you got a pocket calculator. One of the issues that goes through some of these movies, a concern, a worry, is what is called the military-industrial complex. I got to do my best impression of a 1960s politician, but Dwight Eisenhower is leaving office. He's been president for 8 years. He is a former general, and he is quoted as saying, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." That was that for 1960 Eisenhower. Not bad? There you go. But here's the thing. Eisenhower's a general, and everybody was expecting. We spent a lot of money. He spent a lot of money winning World War II in Europe. What did we expect? They call it the peace dividend. This should be getting cheaper. Guess what? It wasn't. He was spending more on the military after the Korean War than when he showed up to office. And this debate, these discussions come up as well. Part of Iron Man's character arc. Tony Stark is a scumbag in Iron Man 1 when you meet him. He's a war profiteer. This is where it gets funky. His dad was a war profiteer. They show him, Howard Stark, they show him in flashbacks, things of that nature. Basically think of it this way. Imagine Elon Musk, genius level, figures out who was one of the best markets to buy your stuff, the U.S. military and the U.S. government. That's exactly what he does. The military-industrial complex is the sea of companies, organizations who produce goods to sell to the government. For instance, again, these are taken from, actually I think it is Iron Man 2 because it's Don Cheadle is now playing Brody. But it goes into this. What does Stark Industries produce? The Jericho missile system. Again, if you're watching, he goes, they test fire the weapon system, and it obliterates a couple miles of Afghan mountains. Hey, made by Stark. Stark Tech, Stark Industries. The bomb that lands right by Tony Stark blows up, sends fragments through him, forces him to develop the arc reactor, save his own life. Guess what? Stark technology. You get to see it there. They make mortars. They make rocket launchers. They make drones. And in Iron Man 2, hey, guess what? They introduced Hammer Advanced Weapon Systems. Not as good, but Justin Hammer. It's the same thing. Hammer is competing for government contracts, influence, etc. So therefore, you get this idea, and it shows you how far they will go to make profit. Even in the original Iron Man, what happens to the CEO when Tony Stark says, we can't do this anymore? The CEO tries to kill Tony Stark because, no, this is really profitable. I forget his last name, but Jebediah. Got his own Iron Man armor, but you get the idea. This is an example today. I've looked it up, at least for publicly available data. It's not changed much. Lockheed Martin builds fighter planes for the United States government. $30 billion a year every year. They're about 5% of the defense budget. You're building a warplane that drops at, it was supposed to be $50 billion a pop. It's now well over $100 million a pop. Great project, 250% cost overrun, and they're paying it. Boeing, overall, the shape of the chart is pretty much the same today as it was here in 2015. I'd be interested in some little ones. Raytheon, I would be curious if they have caught Boeing, because Raytheon is producing a lot of the weapons, artillery shells, missiles that are being used in the Ukraine today. I would suspect they may have closed that distance with Boeing, especially in the last year. General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. Oh, here's a funny one. All of a sudden, Humana. That's a healthcare company. They provide healthcare to the military establishment, civilians, etc. Huntington Ingalls Industries, they're a shipbuilder. But you start doing the math, start adding this up. This is a massive part of the American economy. It's a part of the Arkansas economy. Again, Raytheon, I think it's El Dorado. Did I say it right for my Arkansas natives? Sorry, I'm an import. It's El Dorado if you're if you're a Yankee. But yep, El Dorado. There are Raytheon plants there. They're producing for the military-industrial complex. They create jobs, etc. Like I remember the F-35. You can see that's what the highlight here is, if it shows up. They manufacture parts of it in 42 different U.S. states. Why? Because if you touch it or cut it, everybody somewhere across the country loses jobs. Therefore, you can't cut it. It's not bulletproof, but it's a pretty good way to keep it around. All right. Technology 2, technology proliferation. Things spread. Things grow. You come up with the next good idea, somebody a couple of years from now is going to figure it out. I'm old enough. Who here knew what Vines was? Got a couple. We all know what TikTok is, right? Guess what? TikTok was Vines done better. Got rid of the limits, things of that nature. So all of a sudden, but somebody has an idea, somebody expands on it, it moves. Technology expands, grows. You could do this for almost anything, any form of technology. Part of what is Justin Hammer doing? He wants suits. I remember, I can't do a good Sam Rockwell impression, but he is this great, smarmy defense guy. I mean, he's perfect. But countries want suits. They realize that Iron Man is awesome. A one-man fighting machine who can do these great missions. We want that. People are trying it. What you see, there's one, again, you can find the clip. There's a congressional hearing where they show that countries are trying it, and to horrific results. A weapons test goes wrong, and it mows down the cameraman in the crowd. There's one where Justin Hammer himself basically severs the spine of a test pilot because basically the suit does a 180-degree upper torso flip, but the feet are still pointing out towards the camera. Oof. And Tony Stark estimates how long development of this technology will take. And this is a plot point, though, of Whiplash's character. He's a genius. He replicates the arc reactor. He modifies it. This is, again, the race scene where he fights Tony Stark with just basically the whips. And notice what he's doing by the end of it. He has built his own flying version of the Iron Man armor. The thing is, we see this on a regular basis. The real world, nuclear weapons. There is not a general who will allow an opponent, if they can possibly help it, to have an advantage. One country figures it out, their adversaries feel they need it as well. The United States develops nuclear weapons in 1944. Soviets aren't going to stand for that. They developed theirs in 1949. Notice you get a split. The UK and France don't like the Soviet Union. They want their own. They develop them. China and the Soviet Union didn't get along, so China develops nuclear weapons. India and China don't get along over the Himalayas. India gets nuclear weapons. Pakistan and India don't get along. Guess what? They get nuclear weapons because they're fighting over Kashmir, etc. It is a spiral. And that is part of the debate. What happens if Iran gets nuclear weapons? It's not going to stop at Iran. The Saudis might get them, etc. But this is the kind of proliferation that we see in the real world. That is dangerous, to say the least. Okay, doing good on time. Another example, drones. Drone warfare. We all love the images we see taken above tech campus, things of that nature. Oh, look how pretty it looks, etc. The U.S. has done drone warfare for at least 20 years. What you see, I found, this is just the big tactical stuff. Maritime surveillance, Predators, Reapers, they're flying missions over Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia. The thing is, you got a new idea. People love that. Chinese spy balloons. Unmanned, throw it in the stratosphere, let it fly along, take some pretty pictures, do something with it. That has spread along. Russia is using drones to fight the war in the Ukraine. Why? Drones don't have pilots. Your drone, you send 10 drones to attack a power station. They shoot down 8, 2 hit the target, successful mission, and nobody gets killed. Iran is selling Russia more drones to, Russia was not planning for a year-plus war. With technology proliferation, half the countries of the world, half the militaries of the world have some form of drone. They could be as small as model airplanes to as large as cargo planes here. All right. So I'm going to try and wrap up in the next, say, 5 minutes. Here's a big one. Age of Ultron, artificial intelligence. If you're a science fiction fan, artificial intelligence comes out, and what happens? Humanity's going to have a really bad day. The Terminator films, etc. I love these. You notice, war games going back to, Matthew Broderick when he's like 25 goes into this. The movie is that Tony Stark realizes that we need more help. And that's going to be our theme for these last two. After the Battle of New York, what if another invading army shows up? We need a way to stop them. He starts experimenting with artificial intelligence because he's got drones. He figured that out. But he wants them thinking, and the battle is between what becomes Vision and Ultron. Because Ultron is the stereotypical science fiction artificial intelligence. The best way to protect humanity is to exterminate it. And again, war and fighting ensue. But this, in real life, is a real debate and discussion right now. How far do we go? Part of it, we've already dealt with this sort of stuff. We are subjected to algorithms on an hourly basis. Who shops on Amazon? Yeah, there you go. Congratulations. The Amazon algorithm is collecting your data and saying, you bought this. How about this product behind door number 1? The one I always bring up, Target. Target was the one that shocked people. The Target algorithm was almost as able to predict pregnancy as a urine pregnancy test. And it was detecting it through people's shopping patterns. Yeah, people are like, what? And that was about 10 years ago. One of the examples, ChatGPT. This has exploded the calendar year, the last 2 months. All right, how many of you have played with it? Yeah, there you go. Congratulations. I was going to bring up, if you want an example, my hospitality. Plan a wedding and type that into ChatGPT. I'd be fascinated if you just put it that way. See what it kicks you back. And then, plan a wedding with a $10,000 budget. I suspect you get a very different look. And then tell it, by the way, plan a wedding in Arkansas with a $10,000 budget, and in what month to plan said weddings, etc. And it will take that information, explores the web, and gives you an answer. It'll give you the text. The debate and discussion over this is AI-controlled aircraft, tanks, etc. One of the biggest things about a lot of aircraft is it is physically demanding. How many of you saw the Top Gun Maverick this past summer? Yeah, at 10 Gs, literally, you're talking about it's going to permanently alter your physiology if you fly that. I think actually this is one where Tom Cruise is short. He's like my height. This is one that's actually kind of accurate. He might be able to survive a 10 inverted roll as he does in that movie. But what would be awesome, AI doesn't need to worry about G-forces. It's not going to wind up with all its blood in its little toe when it goes over and turns up. You could do 20 Gs with AI. Never think twice about it. What's the worry? AI, aircraft, tanks. This just broke. I had to highlight it. Nothing says I love you in Valentine's Day like AI flew a mission for 17 hours in a modified F-16. That's a long time to be up and flying. My math and guess is they had to refuel this thing in air. AI figured out aerial refueling too. What's the danger? The AI in all of this is only as smart as the people who've programmed it. Imagine you take your F-16 here and you say, I want you to make sure we want to keep Chinese weather balloons out. Sounds pretty simple, right? The worry, the fear. What if the AI goes, well, what's the fastest way to keep Chinese weather balloons out? I'm going to assassinate President Xi of China. 17 hours would put you anywhere on the west coast of the United States. You'd be past China. And are there fail-safes involved? Great and grand questions, but notice this is literally, released 2 days ago. Our last technology topic, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. The debate here, and one of a free and democratic society, is liberty versus security. The movie, again, the spark is the Battle of New York. They're developing these autonomous global defense platforms. Interestingly, it's also Stark Tech. Those are repulsor lifts. And oh, by the way, they're gun platforms. They're really big gun platforms. These things use AI and an algorithm to choose targets. Think about you launch one of these over New York when Loki and his band come through, and this could probably mop it up in a couple of minutes. But guess what? Somebody gets to program, Hydra in this case, infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., reprograms them, and it's basically going to create a population who is passive and just joins and follows along. Captain America goes through, defends, and ends this debate. He goes through, he defeats the 3 helicarriers, etc. But we got these debates all the time already. Now, in American history, we've always had these debates. The venue changes. If you're trying to read Mein Kampf in World War II, the U.S. government's probably going to have a conversation with you. If it's the Cold War, it's the Communist Manifesto. Why are you reading Marx nowadays? In political science, in world politics, this resurfaces really after 9/11, because you start to get into practices that are kind of questionable, like data mining. Collecting data, sorting it, looking at, say, cell phone records and those sort of things. Library databases. I see my library and look around like, yeah. Oh, the library, everybody just got really, really nervous. But, providing library databases, searches, you're looking for, what students are looking up, thermonuclear engineering textbooks in your library database. Somebody might want to have a talk with you. Hey, cell phone privacy. These things are great. They're awesome. I think it's the New York Police Department has more than 1,000 Apple phones just sitting on shelves because they are elements of crimes, both victims and perpetrators, but they can't unlock them without enough information. They got to have a warrant. Google searches. Google sends each month a list of made top searches that people make. For instance, this month is Rihanna pregnant? Will be number 1. Yep, confirmed. But what happens? They're looking for when people are starting to Google things that may be dangerous. Hey, social media data and privacy. The Zuckerberg. We know the algorithm is spying on us. We see the ads. But the debate that's come up recently, TikTok. A lot of these companies are American made. So we were like, okay, yeah, I know you spy on me, but now it's a Chinese firm. And there's definitely been a lot of debate, discussion, but this debate and discussion is just the 2023 version of a much older topic that we've seen in political science and American politics for the last few decades. So, with that, my last sort of walk-away points before I start taking questions. Go see Ant-Man Quantumania in theaters this weekend. Shameless plug. If you like the class, if you like what we're talking about, when it comes March, when they open up in registration, come and roll. We'll talk about it. And because part of the class, I will tell you, you get to write and talk about what you want. I mean, what I hit, a dozen films? There's at least a dozen more that you can dig into based on your specialty. But with that, let me open the floor. Any questions from all of y'all? Yes? It is officially listed under political science for this summer. Again, we talked about this a little bit. Different disciplines would view things, approaches differently. If you're like, for instance, we did talk briefly with like English as a film class. Like a good example here, Loki used like matrix viewpoint. This is that weird realm the TVA sends you to. If you notice, the whole thing is green. That's why I said the matrix vision. But I think all of our disciplines could look at this class in their own light, their own viewpoint. Film analysis approach would look at it one way. The historians would look at it another way. I, as a political scientist, I'm going to look at the bigger political picture around a lot of these things. So, other questions? Yes. Summer, yes. Summer 1 online. That was part of it. My dear friend, Angela Black is back there. We have discussed this. One of the biggest tricks for any kind of film in particular is stuck a little bit in the past. We have a lot of databases that are out there. If you want to do a classics of IR film, things like Dr. Strangelove, the whole Criterion collection, it's one-stop shopping. We pay a fee, great. But we started finding if you want to do stuff that's more contemporary, you pay individual licensing fees, and it's for so long. And it's that's part of why I thought when you're asking students for materials, there's not a textbook that I found, so yay. But also when you say you need a Disney Plus subscription for 5 weeks, and it's also better than Hulu and Netflix because they don't take things away. That would be my luck. I put something on the syllabus and they decide to, nope, sorry, we're going to pull that one. But again, yeah, so that's where we're coming from. And I will say as a plug to the library, I think they have a table set up. For students who would want it or need it, they do have a lot of the DVDs, the physical copies in the collections. Yes, I saw the table set up, and a lot of them, I know Captain Marvel was there, a lot of those movies as well. So there's a lot of ways you can get the materials. Other questions? Yes?
Not necessarily about films, but still in the Marvel spectrum.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it yet, but in terms of your topics, you talked about Black Panther as well as Captain Marvel with racism and sexism.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had a chance to watch Ninja Devil Dinosaur yet and see how that already applies some of these topics to that show in particular?
I cannot say I have. That's one thing I was talking about. Somebody notified Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. gets into there's some back topics, and that's 7 seasons of it. I have not, but there is so many pieces. That's one of the things I'm going to have is students basically say, okay, here is something else out there in the Marvel universe. Write me a paper that you care about. Write me 4 or 5 pages on that. May be an example that you bring up. Okay.
What you do, kind of thing. So it's an interesting watch. It pretty much combines topics from the things we talked about in one show, and they addressed it already in the first episode.
Well, I would throw in there those come up in debates and discussions about the original Netflix Marvel shows. You've got The Punisher, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, etc. Those are all they call them the street level event. But again, it's the otherness. I am not literally the god of thunder. But I am just a guy from Hell's Kitchen who's going to try and save this place single-handedly. Then a lot of a cast of otherness comes around. So yeah, there is so much material. As I said, there's too much for a 3-credit class. There's a ton that is possibly out there. That's why I'm gonna talk about some common topics and then set the students, to find what they really care about. Those sort of things. Yes.
Can you repeat what she was talking about?
There is a ton of other Marvel content that is out there. What was it called again?
It just came out. It's called Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur.
Okay.
It's about the smartest Marvel character in the entire universe.
Okay.
Finally telling her story.
All right. Now, is that a comic or show or?
It started off as a comic book series. It's about a
Well,
9-year-old African American girl living in the Lower East Side of New York City. They upped her age up for the Disney Channel show, but she's 13 years old now. And she's this girl with a prehistoric dinosaur, and it talks about racism, sexism, and
Okay.
being a kid, being the smartest person in the entire universe.
Yeah. Again, there's so much content material possibilities out there that you could find interesting and you could run with. What else? Yes.
If you wanted to discuss like the way that biases may have like affected the writing of some of the movies. Like, I personally believe like an anti-women bias kind of poorly affected like Doctor Strange multiverse. So if I were to talk about that in a single story, that is something that
I think certainly that topic will come up. The one I think about the most, this has come up with like the Deadpool movies. They call it refrigerating, if I remember the term correctly, where it's basically Deadpool's significant other is in trouble and he must go to rescue her. So yeah, there is again. My intuition, that is something that is very clear, would be clearly like in a film analysis class. Because you're getting behind the scene. A lot of what I was focusing on was the depictions on the screen. But I think there is still plenty of that. I remember if you want a great, interesting woman biography to read, go read Carrie Fisher's. Because she was everybody knows she's Princess Leia, but she was also an often uncredited professional screenwriter in Hollywood. When a individual would write a script, they would write women's roles. It would what the hell did you? She was the one who would write women more accurately. She would go like, what the hell are you? You can just imagine her like, what the hell are you thinking? Let me rewrite this. But that was a big thing she did after the Star Wars movies were over and stuff like that. That would be a great one to sort of study. I think there is parts and challenges to this. Again, I think that is one, you notice it especially though, I think the power of Black Panther was it was African American directors, writers writing for a African American cast. Finding out how much control you get with women. The only one who really had is Captain Marvel at this point in the Marvel universe. Maybe Black Widow. I'm not exactly sure, but yes, there's definitely it's fertile territory to say the least.
my thing is that like I feel like there's a bias of taking villainizing female trauma with Wanda, and that's what I feel happened.
Okay.
Experience trauma, and they said, oh, immediately she would become evil because that's what women do whenever they experience trauma because they become crazy and do awful things.
Yeah, that is we were sort of talking about, that is the whole deep. All of a sudden Batman is orphaned and he decides to go his route. It'd be interesting, compare Batman versus Wanda. They both have terrible tragedies, lose parents versus losing children, how they are accepted, how they are seen, how they move forward. I know that is one, when you talk about the themes that are out there, questions of trauma, depictions of trauma, effects of trauma, is a huge theme that is out there. Killmonger would fall into that as well. I mean, he's been to war, he's seen death and destruction and perpetrated a lot of it. But it's those depiction, all of a sudden he becomes the uber villain. So there's certainly plenty of fertile ground for that sort of, investigation out there. Yes. Mm-hmm. I'd probably be fairly open. Again, that's what I love. It's an experimental course. We found an experimental number. We threw it out there. If it's great, if I wind up having a waiting list, that will make administrators really, really happy. And then, as we do, there are a lot of topics like that. That one, Dr. Toner has actually been teaching the fall, sports and politics. But again, if it's really well received, students love it and a lot. A lot of it's a little bit awful, but numbers matter. If I got 20 this summer, they all love it, they take it, they kill it. That's going to be like, okay, let's get this thing permanently on the books. Political site, what is it? What is the Earth number? Is it 616, 838, one of those? Put that in the course numbers. But that sort of thing. Again, I love this because every professor needs variety too. I love teaching international relations. I love teaching comparative government, U.S. foreign policy, but throw me a little bit of variety once in a while. And this is, to me, is just like right in my wheelhouse. Again, as Monty Python says, and time is something completely different. So, other questions? Yes.
Can you research like some older movies that we might not have heard of?
Oh.
Kind of fit in the same category, but
Oh.
maybe Marvel movies from 1950s or something.
I don't really know about those. I didn't think about it, but I think this goes. One you could throw in there. This is where I'm going to date myself. The original movie said this could be viable economically. Everybody's like, oh, man, Iron Man. No. Anybody know what was the first big budget '90s movie? X-Men. That helped. There's one before it. Blade. Wesley Snipes actioneer. Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah. Yes. Yep. That. All of a sudden, you have an African American. Again, you talk about the politics of other. That's what's great about this. There's so much like fertile ground, so many possibilities. Again, it kind of gets to your question. It would be a whole different design team. Like I think it's probably a decade before Kevin Feige ever shows up. I'd be interested to see like what's behind the scene. He was a huge action star at the time. He that was his personal like passion project. But again, yes, the Daywalker vampire is going to be this individual who, just like Killmonger's, a man with literally no home. He's not human. He's not vampire. He is completely the other. But let's go here. One or two more, and we'll call it a morning or an afternoon. And yes. For what my thoughts, at least, I got to have some grounding. So we'd probably be movies. I think the television shows would be good. That's one of the things that does come up, the comic depiction over time. That is what Dr. Moses talked about to go full circle. Like he's showing, Captain America punching Nazis in the 30s. That's where he comes from. But he's still punching Nazis ever since. So yes, again, I'm going to be pretty open about this, letting you explore what you care to. Because I'm little bits and pieces, the highlights. They got a lot going on if you want to look into it. And that's both the beauty and the agony of them all. So with that, I will thank you all for giving me this hour and having good turnout. Have a nice day.
Could you stay for after it's over with? If people have a question for you.
Sure.